Welcome to the Comic Sauce Podcast, where we talk comics and comics culture. I am Henry Liu, and today I'm joined by Christian Diadamo. Christian, how's it going?
Hey, hey, it goes well.
Crazy.
Excellent.
Anyway, close.
I'm also joined by Porfirio Rangel. Porfirio, how are you?
Doing good, Henry. Happy to be here. Happy post Valentine's Day.
Good to hear. Yes, today is February 15th, 2024. Happy belated Valentine's Day. And today we're going to talk about Scott Pilgrim versus the world. So we decided on this movie as our topic as something of a Valentine's related thing because it does have romantic elements to it. It has a lot more than that as well, but it's about relationships. So we'll get into it. We'll get into the movie and yeah, let's give the spoiler alert. This is a movie that's 14 years old now, so probably don't need to do that, but just in case you haven't seen it, spoiler alert on Scott Pilgrim versus the World. All right, let's get right into it. Scott Pilgrim versus the World, released in 2010. Let me read off the little IMDb description here. In a magically realistic version of Toronto, a young man must defeat his new girlfriend's 7 evil exes one by one in order to win her heart. This movie is rated PG-13, runtime 1 hour 52 minutes. All right. So, yeah, with the Valentine's theme, it might be interesting to talk about like the romance aspect of this movie. But you know, like I had mentioned, it's not exactly like a romantic movie, not a rom-com in any way, really. Uh, so I was thinking we could pretty much do like a standard movie recap format here, and we can kind of touch upon relationship type stuff as we go along. Yeah. So what do we think? Um, did we all rewatch this movie recently?
hmm
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. So that might be a good starting point. Like, were there any revelations, anything that you caught this time around that you didn't previously? Any like different take on the movie now that you've seen it again recently? General thoughts there. Porfirio, it seems like you have a reaction there.
Well, I feel like out of the three of you, out of the three of us, I've seen it the least. I hadn't seen it since like it first came out, like you said, in 2010. So rewatching this 14 years later, it felt like watching it for like the first time,
Hmm.
And all I can really remember was like when I watched it for the first time, I didn't like it. I thought I was hella confused. I didn't like it mainly because of Michael Cera. um, and I don't know, I kind of thought the movie was all over the place. And now I can tell you the second time watching it, I still don't like Michael Cera. That's that opinion still hadn't changed, but um, I did understand it a lot more, and it was just fun and goofy and ridiculous in the best possible way. I just think a younger me at that time, let's see, how old was I? I was a sophomore in high school, so like probably like 15. I just probably didn't appreciate movies like that. And now this time around, I'm like, okay, like this is like dope, you know?
Excellent. Good to hear. Yeah. Yeah, you made some interesting points there. Like your initial viewing, you found it to be kind of all over the place. I kind of get that. There's a lot in this movie. It throws a lot at you. And yeah, in ways it was ahead of its time. So I could see, people watching this for the first time 14 years ago being like, what is this thing I'm seeing? Right? What is happening? Is it a comedy? Is it an action movie? Is it about superheroes? Is it about video games? Like, uh, is this about like relationships? Like, what is this even? Right? So I kind of get that take. And yeah, I think over time, it kind of led the way for a lot of fandom type stuff, right? So now it doesn't seem like that random and chaotic. And there's like, I don't know, like a method to its madness, right? So we can continue the conversation there. But what about you, Christian? Any new revelations on this movie?
Yeah. Let's see. So I first watched this, back in the day, I didn't see it in theaters. I ended up seeing it when it came to like DVD. Um, 2010, 2011 is around the time that I saw it, and I really, really liked it at the time. Um, I was like 18, 19 around that time, and of course it's because I was around the same age as, pretty much all the characters. And it was like, oh wow, this is really great. This is like a movie for me. And so uh I've kind of just continuously watched this movie every so often, every like few years. Um, till, I watched it a couple days ago once again, and I still really like it. I think that I do get pretty nostalgic for this movie actually. There's something that especially watching it this time where the characters kind of they feel so like kind of well fleshed out that they kind of feel a bit like your friends, and it kind of reminds you of hanging out when you're with your friends at that age, being in a really, really crappy band, which I was in high school, uh, just playing in your garage, and there's a lot of fun to the movie where even if you don't know a character quite like certain characters, you kind of see your friends in different characters. Um, although how I will also say like how I feel about Scott has definitely changed. Um, over the years, and like I think I didn't pick up on it as much as like the first time, but Scott really sucks. Scott's a pretty shitty person, you know. Uh, of course, over the course of the movie, he grows and learns and um earns the power of self-respect
Yes.
at the end of the movie.
Yeah.
Uh, but it's something that like definitely took me like a couple times like thinking about it to be like, oh wow, this don't be like Scott. Really,
Yeah.
Scott's a terrible protagonist. Of course, I think that's the point of the movie, or the point of Scott Pilgrim, and that's part of like what makes that's part of the charm of it. Um, and, and so, but I think even so, even with a terrible protagonist, you can't help but just love the entire world of Scott Pilgrim.
Amen. Amen to that. Yeah, so on my end, yeah, my experience rewatching this, I just watched it again today. Um, yeah, this one is like an all-time favorite for me. I did see it in the movie theaters when it first came out in 2010 and immediately fell in love with it and became completely obsessed with all things Scott Pilgrim. I went and snatched up the comics and like sought out movies that like other movies that the actors in the movie were in and just yeah, I was already a huge Edgar Wright fan, just like tripled my Edgar Wright fandom, and just full tilt went deep into Scott Pilgrim fandom. And over the years, I have declared this movie to be my number one all-time favorite movie. So I guess the question when I was rewatching it today is, does it still hold up? You know, there is an aspect of this movie, we've kind of touched upon it. It sort of taps into like youth culture, right? Remind us of when we were young. So now that I'm older, I keep thinking, oh, like I'm a dad now, and these days are way well behind me, right? So I was thinking, oh, maybe, it won't connect with me as much now as the years go on, right? Um, so that was kind of the main question for me. But I still really enjoyed it today. I had a complete blast rewatching it. And I think it does hold up. Yeah, maybe I don't relate with the characters as much as I did when I was younger. But I think that is sort of offset by the nostalgia factor, like kind of like what you were saying, Christian. It reminds me of that time, and it reminds me of when I first saw the movie and when I fell in love with it. And like I can practically like quote the movie, and just like it was just I completely love watching this movie. So yes, it does hold up. Now, would I still give it like my number one movie of all time? Let me save that. Let me tease that. I'll save that for later. Yeah, we'll talk about that later specifically. But for now, you brought up an interesting question, Christian, about like the Scott Pilgrim character, because yeah, similarly, when I first saw the movie, I thought Scott Pilgrim was super cool. I could relate to him, and he's like the hero of the story. And I'm like, let's go Scott, right? But now you kind of realize, okay, this guy is a very flawed character, and he's kind of an a-hole, to be honest, right? Um, and I picked up on that. And so I guess, maybe a good question now is, how much of an a-hole is Scott Pilgrim in this movie? How how bad a person is he really? What do we think? So let me just start by saying, like, I think the way he treats Knives Chow when he first meets Ramona is pretty messed up, right? How he handles
Hmm.
all that, right? His friends are even telling him, you should break up with Knives if you're so in love with this other girl, right? And he just doesn't. So that's probably the main thing, but it's probably not the only thing, right? So what do we think? How much of an a-hole is Scott?
Yeah, that definitely is the big thing with Scott. You know, he starts dating a high schooler when he's 23, and then of course doesn't break up with her when he starts trying to get with Ramona.
Yeah.
And of course, like that's kind of the biggest Scott like controversy. And of course, he's someone that kind of, he kind of runs. He's a pretty flaky person. Um, I think Julie Powers is definitely someone that sees that in Scott and like calls him out on it.
Yeah.
There's like really the only one to like, I guess, Wallace and his sister kind of do too. But you're like, man, why does Julie hate Scott so much? But now rewatching it, you're like, yeah, Julie's right. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that seems to be the main thing. Like he shouldn't have been dating Knives in the first place. It was like a rebound. She was way too young for him, and he was just kind of taking advantage of someone who was very young and naive, right? Um, so that's number one. But number two, he definitely should have broken up with her the moment he realized he was completely obsessed with Ramona, right? And he definitely should have broken up with her when he started dating Ramona. So like all the while, like basically Wallace was telling him to break up with Knives, like during this whole period, and he just didn't because he felt uncomfortable with it. And he didn't actually do it until like way too late. Yeah. So I don't know. It was a dick move for sure. Um, not I don't think it was like the worst thing in the world. Like the way I see it, he was pretty young himself. We all do stupid shit when we're young. So I mean not to like justify the behavior, but you know, he was young. He broke up with Knives in person, which is like, you know, kind of cool. Like these days, people break up with each other through email and text and shit, right? So, I mean, he did do it in person. I don't know. I don't want to defend Scott Pilgrim that much, but I don't know. His offenses didn't seem that bad to me. I don't know. Any thoughts on this, Porfirio?
I mean, w- Scott, like, yeah, he was just someone like you guys said, like, I didn't really care for, like, there was, I think it was like after like the third X or something, he has like that one scene with like Ramona about like, oh my gosh, like you dated this person, you dated this person, and
Oh yeah.
kind of like, yeah, like slut shaming Ramona, you know,
Yep. Good call.
and um, oh, it was right before he fought the Forfex, right?
That's right. Yeah. Right before.
Hmm.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Okay, so yeah, and then he was kind of like questioning, like, is this all worth it? Like, and um, and then I think like started questioning like Ramona, like, are you gonna like dump me or whatever? And I just think like one, like he kind of like put himself at like a higher stool, like I'm better than you, but like you guys just both said, like he cheated on Nice with Ramona, so it's like he's not any better.
Yeah.
And then here he is, like kind of like yeah, like totally like trashing her about like her past, which has nothing to do with Ramona. And I was just like, dude, like Scott, like get off your fucking like high stool and just like if you care about this girl, then just like why does her past have to define her,
Solid point. Yeah. That
Hmm.
that's a good call. Um, and that makes me think of a little bit what we're talking about, the relationship side of the movie. And that's just how it handles relationships. Like to me, yeah, 100%. Like the way he reacts to Ramona's past is, I mean, definitely like a-hole type behavior, right? Like why is he such a jerk about all that stuff? But I think it's kind of cool in that in a movie that is very surreal and bonkers and has like a lot of crazy shit happening. Um, it handles relationships in a very real way, right? Because um, is Scott a real dick to Ramona in this instance? Yes. Does he handle things with knives very poorly? Yes. Yes, yes, and yes, all these things. But to me I mean that is like real world relationships. They are not uh clean,
Perfect.
yeah, just like everything goes according to plan type. Things are messy. This is like for such a surreal movie, like the way it handles relationships is very real. And this is how it is. Like people don't behave the way they're supposed to behave, right? This guy who's supposed to break up with his current girlfriend completely should, even he knows he should, and he doesn't. because he's weirded out by it. He's not comfortable with it. That's real life, you know. So I do appreciate that realism, and it kind of goes back to what we talked about before about characters tend to be more relatable if they're flawed, right? Perfect characters we can't relate to so much because those people don't exist in real life, right? In real life, there are people like Scott Pilgrim who don't do the right thing all the time and handle their relationships poorly. So I appreciate that realism, and it's weird to talk about realism in this movie because it is so bizarre, and there are a lot of surreal moments in it. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. And I think especially at a lot of like comic book movies, especially at the time, uh, 2010, where relationships were just kind of the side plot, the B plot. And there really wasn't like a lot of focus. If you focus on it, it usually be something relevant to the plot, but they would kind of get together at the end for the first time, and then that's kind of it. Whereas this one is like, it does really like go out of its way to make the characters feel very real, and it gives them a lot. It gives them problems, it gives them baggage, and they have to like confront a lot of that throughout the story. Mostly Scott, but Scott and Ramona definitely feel like very real people, even though even though they have powers and when they die they turn into coins, and respawn at their house.
Yeah. Hey, so here's a question along these lines. Um, is this a romantic movie? Is this a movie that you would recommend putting on Valentine's Day? What do you think?
It's like a date night kind of movie.
Yeah.
It's a good question.
I think okay. I think it is a romantic movie just because I mean the whole plot is around like romance, you know. But would I put it on date night? Probably not.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, to me, I kind of agree. It doesn't feel like a romantic movie. Yeah, like the plot is like relationship slash romance based. You're fighting for your girlfriend, but yeah, it doesn't feel romantic. It feels like you would think a movie where you have to fight to win the heart of your girl might have some romantic elements to it, but it's kind of romantic in the way that like a video game is where you have to fight to save Zelda or something, like that doesn't feel romantic at all, right? So it's kind of like in that vein. So yeah, as much as I love this movie, like I don't think I would like pull this off the shelf to watch like as like a Valentine's uh date night kind of thing.
Yeah. Uh, yeah, I don't think I would either. I mean, of course, anything's possible, but I guess when I think of this movie, because when I first watched it on DVD, it was just like I guess like me and my guy friends that watched it,
Hmm.
and it almost seems like that's like that. I guess that was kind of more of the vibe that I got from it. Was it's just like it's like, oh yeah, let's all hang out, and let's watch Scott Pilgrim versus the World.
Yeah, I would say I mean I watch both times I watched it by myself. But I feel like this movie is more like a like watch it with your friends kind of movie, you know.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah, I can see that. So yeah, I think we're in agreement. It's not a terribly romantic movie. But there's a lot of fun to be had with this one, I think. I think there's a lot of greatness in the movie. So maybe we can get into into some of the stuff we really enjoyed. Um, any thoughts off the bat here? Things you particularly liked?
Yeah. I'll start. Um, I guess we've talked about this a lot, but or already we've kind of gone a bit into it, but I think like kind of the biggest strength of Scott Pilgrim is kind of the big supporting cast of Scott Pilgrim, where, even if Scott Pilgrim is heavily flawed, um, and he does things in the movie that we don't really like, there's kind of like a bit of a bit of like the charm and relatability a bit to him. And I think like a lot of other people are people I've seen, um, namely like the band, Steven Stills. I always have that like musician friend. Same with Kim, who was like the big I don't care attitude. Uh, as well as, of course, young Neil, the guy is just kind of there, part of your friends group, real quiet, but has the latent talent. Um, and so I think like a lot of, even though like they don't have a lot of screen time, there's so many characters in this movie because
Yeah.
you have the band, you have Wallace, you have the seven
Mhm.
evil X's, um, and I'm trying to think as well. Oh yeah, Stacy, of course, and of course played by all these like now famous actors.
Yep.
Uh, that you can imagine a movie with a cast as large as Scott Pilgrim kind of getting really like muddy, you could imagine like it wouldn't work. But I think every character's like fleshed out enough, but like over the top enough to where each one kind of finds their own place to stand out in the
Yeah.
movie. Everyone kind of has their moment or their scene. Um, and it's such a hyped up version that they all kind of have a way of like having their screen time without really competing. Like the way there's something about it that really like works with this cast is what I'm getting at.
Mhm.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah, looking back at this movie, it's one of those movies where it's like, oh my God, look at this cast and look at what they ended up doing later, right? It's almost um like The Wire or Freaks and Geeks, like one of those things
Hmm.
where like, oh my
Mhm.
God, look at this cast, and then they did all this cool stuff later. But this what they did in this one project was really awesome to start with, right? So there's that factor, like the name dropping factor, all that. But yeah, you brought up a cool point, Christian. Like, especially when I watched this when I was younger, it was like you know the people in this movie, right? It's like, oh yeah, there's that vegan guy who's really annoying. He always talks about how it's so great to be vegan and everything. Or like, oh, there's that guy who's just around, like young Neil, he just like hanging around. He's just there all the time, not really doing anything. And then this is like this movie is like that story. Like everyone you know in your life is in this movie somehow. You're in this movie somehow. Like which character are you, right? So um yeah, there's like a familiarity there, right? Um but yeah, I mean the cast is amazing in this movie. Like not only it's not just like this name dropping thing. It's like, oh, like Captain America and Superman are in this movie, but it's like they're legitimately great in this movie, right? Like there are so many awesome performances, and also like you were saying, Christian, like a lot of the smaller roles are really great too. Like they just have these great little moments to shine. Like Brie Larson is like obviously known as Captain Marvel now, but to me, she'll always be MV Adams. She is so good in this movie, and like she has just like a handful of lines, but she's amazing. She has this like rock star charisma to her, and she's hilarious, and she does this awesome musical number in the movie also. So and that's just her, right? I mean, there are so many great little performances, like Aubrey Plaza as Julie, and Allison Pill is Kim Pine. Brandon Routh is hilarious as Todd. Chris Evans is amazing as Lucas Lee. So tons of great little performances. What else? I mean, there's tons of cool stuff in this movie. we can call out, I think. No, here's a couple other things I'll throw out. Yeah, this is something I thought of today too. So again, with a movie which is like it almost plays like a dream. It's doesn't it's surreal, right? Um, for a movie that plays out like a dream, it's interesting how there are so many realistic aspects to it, right? So we talked about how relationships are handled, but the music too, the music really hits realistically also. And there's a reason for that. Like the actors in this movie, they practiced playing music a lot for this movie. Like Michael Cera, Allison Pill, like all of Sex Bomb, like they practiced a lot, you know, and all the music is like authentic, right? And it kind of like it really shines through. And again, it's just like that interesting factor of like a surreal story that has like these really grounded realistic moments in it. And just like the music alone, it's almost a musical in a way. This movie, the music alone is great. It's really awesome. It's a huge fun factor in the movie, I think.
Mhm.
Again, just going off of that real quick. I know I'm rambling on a bit, but um a lot of care and practice was taken in the fight training too. So there was like music training and fight training. So I wanted to call this out because the late great Brad Allen did the fight choreography for this movie, and he's famous for being part of the Jackie Chan stunt team back in the day. Yeah, and he went on to choreograph many an action movie, including this movie. And one of his last movies he choreographed was Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. But yeah, legendary fight choreographer, sadly died at a pretty young age. Um, but he's got like the chops, right? He's got the track record, and his shit really shines through. And there's like full on kung fu action in this movie, and it's done really well. And again, a really surreal movie. You could almost argue didn't really need to have like realistic kung fu action, but it really does. And it's one of those movies that like you just take one component of it and it's like, oh, this is really cool. Like the music is really cool, or the romance angle is really cool. But yeah, the action angle too, just as an action movie, I think it's really awesome. And a big part is like the action choreography, and there's like a lot of inventive fight scenes with Scott versus the evil X's. So I can't say enough about the action. But yeah, Christian, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah. I guess the action is really great. I think like for me the standout fight is where he has to fight Lucas Lee's stunt
Yeah,
doubles.
yeah,
I thought was really well done. The fight at the beginning was also really cool where he has to fight Matthew Patel, and Matthew Patel's got
yeah,
his singing ghosts,
yeah.
and there's like a little like dance number in the middle there.
Hmm.
Um, and the music is pretty kick-ass.
Yeah.
I think like on a little side note, I really like Scott. The Scott has a really cool bass. I played the bass, and Scott's bass is pretty rad looking, and his tone is like really cool. It hits that real garage rock feel,
Yeah, yeah.
uh, just that kind of sound when you're in like you're around that age, you're in a rock band. It kind of feels like music I would have played. I was kind of playing and interested around that time.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, quick side note on the bass stuff. Like, I think it's really cool. I noticed this kind of for the first time today. There's that bass battle, right, between Scott and Todd. And basically, Todd completely kicks Scott's ass in the bass battle. But it kind of makes sense, right? Because Scott is like from this rinky-dink garage band, whereas Todd is from this established like rock star act, right? The Clash at Demon Head. And Todd's bass playing is like a lot better than Scott's, and he completely like wipes the floor with them. So I thought that was pretty freaking cool. But sorry, go ahead.
And he's also a vegan.
That's right. He sees
That's why-
better than
that's
you
why he's
in every
better.
way. Yeah.
And I really enjoyed the bit with the vegan police.
Oh my God, it's classic.
Afterwards, where he tricks him to drink milk.
Yeah, that's so good.
Is funny. Like,
Yeah.
I guess like yeah, like Scott also like kind of loses to Lucas Lee as well, but managed to kind of win in these like a bit underhanded ways
Yeah.
where he kind of plays up their ego a bit and like kind of manages to trick them in like a fun way. Where he gets Todd to drink the milk and he gets Lucas Lee to grind down the rail so fast he explodes.
Yes.
And yeah, like the whole style, I would say this movie is so like top notch. The way it kind of just goes there, um, with the visuals. You know, the way you get the sound effects, the way when Scott plays a bass, you get like the D like notes kind of coming out of it. So it's more than just like whenever a punch is thrown or when Steven sings, you get the like the lines. Like it really makes this like kind of comic book feel come alive in a way that really hasn't been like you see it in bits and places here and there in movies, but I don't think anything goes all in quite the same way Scott Pilgrim versus the World does.
Yeah. Another quick side note. So this movie is a comic book adaptation. It has an amazing cast. Um, but it's not so much like a superhero comic adaptation. It's like, like kind of a more of an indie slice of life comic book adaptation, right? But there's a lot of superhero DNA in this movie. Yeah. I mean, just look at the cast. Um, yes, Captain America, Chris Evans is in it. Superman, Brandon Routh is in it. Captain Marvel, Brie Larson is in it. And even Thomas Jane, the Punisher, is in it as
Oh
well.
yeah. Mary
Yeah,
Elizabeth Winstead also plays Huntress
that's right.
in a
That's
movie.
right. Good call. Good call. So yeah, a lot of superhero DNA for sure. Um, so I guess we could maybe shift gears a bit. Um, is there anything we didn't like so much about this movie? I think, Porfirio, you kind of alluded to the Michael Cera factor. Um, but yeah, anything we want to call out here as a negative?
I mean, yeah, for me, I just felt like there was just kind of like a lot going on, you know. I feel like you guys kind of put that as a positive, but for me, it just felt like, the graphics are cool and the storyline was out there. I'm just gonna say out
Yeah,
there. But I just felt like there was just a lot going on to kind of like be like, okay, wait, what? Okay, so this guy has vegan like superpowers. Like, wait, and there's like a twins exes. Like, I just felt like there was just like a lot going on, and it was hard to kind of just like pinpoint it like, okay, where is this movie going, you know?
yeah,
Um, because kind of like I think like what you said, Henry, in the beginning, it's like, is this an action movie? Is this a comedy? Is this a romantic movie? Like
yeah.
there's like some like there's a love triangle between Scott, Ramona, and Knives that kind of happens again like towards like the end, like where Knives tries to like kick Ramona's ass for her cheating on with Scott, and then there's definitely some comedic elements, but then there's a lot of action going on with like Scott fighting the exes.
Hmm.
So I just felt like a lot was going on, and I was just kind of like, okay, wait, What? So Scott's ex is like a list rocket star, like rock star, like what? Like it was like everything was just so random, you
Yeah,
know?
a good call. I mean, there is a lot in this movie. We've been kind of saying that over and over. But I remember when this movie first came out, like I was like, "Oh my God, it's the best movie ever." But the main criticism that I had heard, which I've always disagreed with, but that I heard was that there's too much fighting, right? There's like seven evil X's, and he has to defeat all of them. And not only did he have like seven battles, but there's also these other sub battles. There's like Ramona versus Roxy, and then there's like Ramona versus Knives at the end, and then there's Scott and Knives against Gideon, and like there's so much fighting in the movie. There's like Scott versus Gideon's henchmen. There's Scott versus Lucas's stunt doubles. So there's like a lot of fighting, right? So um a lot of the critics were like, I don't know, I think a lot of movie critics were like, they're used to seeing a lot of fighting in shitty movies, right? Like bad B action movies. So like they're seeing this movie and there's like all this fighting. They're like, I don't get it. Why is there so much fighting, right? Um, but the interesting thing to me was like I think for younger generations, we're used to like a lot of fighting. Like this goes to the video game elements of the movie. Like we grew up playing video games, right? So we're used to sitting down 2 hours at a time, just like for 2 hours, just fighting, like playing Street Fighter for 2 hours in a row, right? I just I just had like 30 battles, and that was the whole story. There was no like dialogue scene, there was no romance scene. It was just all fighting, right? So I think that was kind of like in our DNA. So like, people like us would tend to be like, I didn't feel like there was that much fighting. Like we're used to that sort of thing. But for like a traditional movie critic, it was like, what's going on, right? But I will still pose the question to the group here. Like, do you think there was too much fighting in this movie? Any thoughts there?
Hmm. Too much fighting. Hmm. I think you did kind of give a like kind of alluded to something here, like especially looking back on it, looking back on this movie, and like of course playing video games, me playing a lot of video games, being used to a lot of it. I do think movies nowadays, um, especially now that CGI is like much cheaper now than it was 15 years ago. Like movies now seem to have a lot more action, especially like
Hmm.
Hollywood movies, Hollywood
Yeah.
blockbuster movies
Yep.
now have like seem like they have much more action than they used to, you know? And so like my first thought is I don't think so. Um I think personally when I saw it back in the day, um the movie had a lot does have a lot, and like doesn't really build up the characters too much before the action. It's just kind of like this is the evil X, this is their quirk, go.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't really like have a much longer build up before the big fight scene like you would normally expect and say like a blockbuster like this. Um, so
Yeah. I think peeking back off what you just said, Christian. I don't think that there's a lot of fighting, but obviously, like they're all fighting for, like Scott's fighting his exes and everything, or he's fighting Ramona's exes. Like that's obvious. But I think like a little bit of like build up or like backstory to like why they're fighting, I think makes it a little bit better. Like I want to come back to this conversation for when we talk about the TV show because I think I enjoyed that a little bit better because it does that a little bit better in that aspect, you know, like of like backstory. Because the fighting just felt like, okay, they're fighting. Like, what do I care, you know? So I don't want to say like there's a lot of fighting going on, but it just to me it just felt like okay, I don't care, you know.
Mm. That is an interesting point because yeah, with so many characters and just not a lot of screen time for each Evil X, yeah, you don't get a lot of character development uh previous to their battle. So then yeah, there becomes kind of a why should I care about this person factor, right? Um so I guess my counter argument to that is, well, number one, the Evil X battles are all so like inventive. They're all like really a lot of fun and really watchable. Like if it was like just the same kind of fight over and over and over again, then yeah, I could see it becoming kind of tedious. But each one kind of trumps the last, right? It's like a whole new experience each time, which is great. Number two, I think there's a kind of a cool element which you see in a lot of like modern action movies, and that's you get character development within the fight scenes themselves, right? So would it have been cool if we got like a full backstory on each of the seven evil X's prior to their fights? Yes. But that would have been too long of a movie, right? So we get what we got, and that's like each evil X mainly getting their screen time during their fight, right? But yeah, like I said, there's a bit of like character development happening within each fight. You get to know the Lucas Lee character as he's fighting Scott, right? You discover that he's like this total arrogant celebrity who's like really like just um completely obsessed with his own celebrity, right? He has this great line where Wallace goes up to him and says, "I'm a big fan." He says, "Yeah, why wouldn't you be?" Right? And he's like Chris Evans has so many amazing lines in this movie, and again, it's a pretty small role, and he steals the show. So good. Um, but yeah, I think we touched upon a few things here that are notable. Like, um, yeah, at times a movie is a bit much, and it's a little bit more spectacle over substance at times, perhaps. But yeah, anything else we want to call out here is maybe not so great. How about this? So this movie is 14 years old now, and there are a few moments in it I felt watching it today where I was like, oh, like they probably wouldn't do that if they made this movie today. Yeah, so I think there are some problematic aspects to the movie. So some of it is just like sign of the times, culture has changed here and there. The term retard is used at one point. That wouldn't fly today. Um, it's like something like what I'd probably consider microaggressions in the movie. Yeah, I'm kind of curious to get your guys' take on this. Um, so let's see. Oh, so the first Evil X is Matthew Patel, and he's South Asian, and it's kind of cool. He doesn't speak with like an Indian accent or anything. Um, and yet, in his battles, like you mentioned it, Christian, where like in the middle of the fight, he breaks out into like a musical number, and it almost becomes like kind of a Bollywood scene. And he
Hmm.
actually goes into an Indian accent during the song. And yeah, and I don't know, it's just kind of interesting how that was handled. Also the Knives Chow character is kind of like the exoticized Asian female. They allude to her being like the Asian schoolgirl and that whole fetish thing. Um, so I don't know. The movie touches upon things that are like that would be handled differently today. I don't know. Any general thoughts about that sort of thing?
Hmm. Yeah, I do think there definitely is a bit of a dated factor to a lot of that. Um, which a lot of these things I think are kind of addressed later in Scott Pilgrim Takes Off, which we'll probably get into
Mhm.
a
Good
little
point.
later.
Yeah.
Um, the way, yeah, I guess the way they handle, Matthew Patel, knives, and everything, and like I guess like it's so quick that you kind of just notice it for a second. You think, huh, but like the movie kind of like it just kind of clicks into something new like a few seconds later.
Yeah.
That in a
Yeah.
way it does feel like it's like, oh did they do that before they're on to the next thing, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Some
I
things you're like, oh
agree.
yeah, that's right, they did do that. Now that you mention it here, it's like, oh yeah, I didn't totally forgot about that. Although I remember seeing it and being like, oh, that's kind of dated at the time, but
Yeah.
because the movie's so like, it's almost like overwhelming that there's like a bit of blinking, you miss it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like there was definitely a lot of those moments. I feel like kind of like what you guys both said, like Knives' character was very kind of like stereotyped or like a play of words of like, oh, like uh Chow attack or something like
Mhm.
that. I feel like they said that. I don't know. I just also feel like this is like a movie that's like more like kind of, I wouldn't say like, I don't know, maybe I could be wrong, but even though like Scott Pilgrim, Michael Cera is like that awkward nerdy kid. I don't know if that's like the target audience. I feel like it's a little bit also kind of like the bro kind of jock audience because I just feel like it's just like Michael Cera being like fighting like an ex and just being like, yeah, dude, you go for it. Like, get that girl, And Ramona is just kind of like right there, like stone cold, like no personality, you know?
Mhm.
And again, I think that's what the TV show does better is like actually gave her a little bit of a personality, but and even like that one scene where like Ramona and her fourth ex where she's just kind of like, oh, I kind of had like a lesbian face, like
Mhm.
I feel like that would definitely get docked nowadays,
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
um but yeah, it's yeah, I would say I don't think it did it that well.
Oh yeah, that too. The Roxy character, like that whole thing was really ridiculous where like, you know, we were talking about how Scott has to come up with inventive ways to defeat the X's. So the way he defeats Roxy is by like touching her at the
Hmm.
back of her knee because like apparently if you do that you give her an orgasm. Like it's just like completely ridiculous. Yeah. But yeah, like that the way that character was handled was like you just wouldn't see that these days, you know. Um yeah, so like comedy is very subjective. So it's hard to say, but like I found like the comedy was so funny that that helped too sort of to get past some of these like potential problem moments. Yeah. So there was one joke in there I noticed today that like they definitely wouldn't have it these days. But it's like right before Scott breaks up with Knives, Knives is like inviting him to dinner. It's like, oh, my parents want to have you over for dinner tonight. You want to come? And Scott says, "Oh, for Chinese food?" Because she's Chinese. And
Yeah.
like, I don't know why it's really funny to me, because like they set it up because he like tells his friends that she's Chinese, and like her identity as a Chinese person is like kind of like noted throughout the movie. So there was a joke like, okay, well, are we eating Chinese food? And like I said, that joke would probably not be in there if this movie was made today, but I think it's funny, and I think most of the jokes in this movie do hit. It is a funny movie. So at least for me, I think that helped to like get over some of these moments that do feel dated and are a bit problematic. So I guess we can say that. Like I mean, that goes for a lot of things. Like it's harder, it's easier to swallow this kind of stuff if the comedy is like genuinely funny, and I think that's generally the case here. So um just say that. What else? Oh, hey, we brought up Ramona a little bit. This might be an interesting thing to talk about, but another kind of potential problem area is the Ramona character. She's been described as like a stereotypical manic pixie dream girl. I mean, I think that term in itself is kind of problematic these days, but yeah, we kind of alluded to it. Like she's, well, could be considered kind of a one-dimensional character in the movie. She's, I don't know, maybe not that well fleshed out. I don't know. What do we think about the Ramona character? Could she have been developed better in the movie, you think?
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
so.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, like she doesn't have as much to really do in this movie. You get a bit of her backstory through the exes, but yeah, unfortunately, she does kind of fall into that manic pixie dream girl trope here. Um, which I guess we'll get into more with Scott Pilgrim Takes Off later. Where they actually do get like flesh out her story and her character much more. But yeah, unfortunately
Mhm.
here, um, yeah, she is a little flat. I think a behind the scenes story I've heard about this movie was that I think that when the movie was the movie was in production before the comic had finished, so they didn't have the ending.
Hmm.
And so the original ending was actually that um Scott and Knives were going to get back together at the end. That was the original ending, and it did terribly with test audiences.
Hmm.
They really didn't like that idea of Scott getting back with a high schooler. And so they may have probably originally wrote the script more with that ending in mind. And
Mm.
so, um, but because it didn't do so well, they reshot it to where he gets with Ramona
Mm.
at the end. And it's a little bit more about Ramona. So unfortunately,
Mhm.
that may have been, a bit of a casualty of that. But yeah, I do think uh she is a bit, I guess, just underdeveloped.
She has cool outfits, I'll say that. She has cool. Her hair's cool.
Her hair is definitely cool in the movie.
Mhm.
Yeah. Wasn't there like a scene where like Scott gets mad or something for like her changing her hair color?
Yeah. Well, he freaks out when he
Yeah, okay.
first sees her with blue hair. Yeah. He kind of loses his shit. Yeah. 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 No, the Ramona has an awesome look. I think she is easily the most cosplayed character of the movie. Yeah, I to this day I see Ramona Flowers cosplays at conventions.
Oh,
Um,
really? You can
yeah.
notice that?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Between the hair and like the big mallet she has, with a little
Mm,
star bag. Yes, it's pretty
hmm
recognizable. Yeah, I don't know. Is the Ramona Flowers character problematic here? Um, yeah, I mean, I get what you guys are saying. I think the character could have been fleshed out better. Um, yeah, like rewatching it today, I thought it was pretty cool that like she she kind of surprised Scott, like um when she like actually showed up to their date on time. He was like sure she was gonna show up late, but she actually got there before him. And then she actually showed up to his his gig, right? And Scott's like, "Oh, you came," like surprised, and she's like, "Yeah, I totally came." Um, so I just think it's kind of cool that she seems like a kind of a responsible person. Like in Scott's mind, she's like this flaky, beautiful girl, right? But actually, she actually like shows up on time and shows up to things that she says she's gonna show up for, right? Um, and then yeah, we do get backstory on her, and there is a bit of an arc, she kind of realizes like kind of how terribly she's treated her boyfriends from past experience, and she kind of like learns to appreciate um, being a better person at the end, right? So, I don't think it's like a completely like one-dimensional character. There is some substance there. There's a character arc. Um, but I do get it. Like the character very much is like the prize in a video game. Like Scott is fighting all these opponents in order to win her heart. Yeah, she's literally like the damsel in distress in in the video game, like, Princess Peach or Zelda, you name it. That's Ramona Flowers in this movie. That's the role she has taken on. So I get it, inherently there's some problems there. Yeah. All right. So we can move on to random thoughts. And I know we're all kind of looking forward to talking about like the broader Scott Pilgrim universe, like the comics and the Netflix series and all that. So yeah, any just kind of random thoughts about Scott Pilgrim in general? It seems like we do want to talk about the series some. So maybe we can start there. Yeah, I think maybe the character development that we felt was kind of lacking with Ramona, we kind of got with the series, and not only Ramona, but with like a lot of the sub characters from the movie, right? So yeah, how do we feel about the series?
Uh, Here, why don't you start, Porfirio?
I liked it a lot better. Like, yeah, I like the series a lot better. I think like with kind of like what you alluded to, Henry, like with the series, there's just way more time to flush out the characters, like get backstories to like who the exes are, like why Ramona was with them, and then why she left. Um, and like I think kind of like that thing I told you guys that I had like a problem, but like there's a lot going on, I feel like that was able to be fleshed out in the animation. Um, like, just I think we've said this so many times for like anime and manga is that like some material just doesn't get translated well to live action. And I feel like this Scott Pilgrim storyline, I haven't read the comics, so that's why I can't say from the comics, but like the Scott Pilgrim universe, from what my understanding, seems to work a lot better in the animation than it can in the live action. Just because the animation, it just feels more realistic. um, but I enjoyed it more. The humor was just a lot more funnier. Scott isn't so much like a dick as in the movie, and maybe it's just also because it's not like Michael Cera in person. It's just his voice. Was it? It's his voice, right?
It is. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe it's just because I don't have to see his face, but uh, I just had a lot more fun with the animation. It was a lot more like, okay, I could take this.
Nice. Yeah, thoughts on the series, Christian?
Yeah, I also really like the series. I do think I kind of agree. Like, um, Scott Pilgrim in animation, I think does work. I think just it feels a little bit more of a little more natural. The kind of like off the wall weirdness that it has, works a little better in animation than I think it does in live action. I still really, really like the live action movie and like kind of the way that it approached it, and it's kind of the only like movie that really does it like that. But something about like the animation just like really just like I don't know, it just really clicks. The animation studio Science Saru Anime Studio did a really, really great job. Um, and like I don't know, for some reason that it feels a bit more easier that someone can just pull out a giant hammer out of their backpack, or that um when you just punch someone, they just turn into a bunch of coins, and that's them dying.
It's like
Yeah.
it's like, oh, that makes sense for
Yeah.
sure.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
why, like, just put Scott in your bag. Like, that's totally normal.
Yeah. And it's like it's stuff that you could like it feels a bit more at home in say like anime or like cartoons. The crazy stuff just kind of happens.
Yep.
And you could accept it with just very just regular people, you know, going about like their regular lives with no actual like superpowers, even though they do have, superpowers in
Yeah.
a way like they're um and so it also feels like a big response to I think um Scott Pilgrim and Brian Lee O'Malley wrote it, and how he feels all this times later about Scott Pilgrim.
Good call. Yeah. Yeah, you guys are making good points. I think the bonkers nature of the Scott Pilgrim stories are kind of more appropriate in an animated format. And I would add to that the original source material is an indie comic that is heavily manga inspired. Yes, it is an English language indie comic, but it reads very much like a manga. It almost feels like you're reading a manga. So even more reason why like the anime series feels kind of right, feels just right in a way. So yeah, definitely agree there. Good points. Um, Although kind of devil's advocate, um, rewatching the movie today, there's a moment that I think hits really well. And that's when like the movie officially goes off the deep end, like um so up to the point where Scott battles Matthew Patel, it kind of feels like you're in the real world, right? I mean, there are some quirky elements to it, but it's mainly realistic, right? But then they all go to this battle of the bands, and this fight breaks out, and all of a sudden there's like demon hipster chicks and people getting disintegrated, people turning into coins. It's like, what the hell is happening, right? And I remember when I first saw the movie and this happened, it was like one of those what the fuck is happening kind of moments, right? And it just really hits perfectly because up to that point, like I'm saying, it does feel like you're in kind of this like um slice of life, rom-com kind of realism type movie, youth culture or whatever. And then it's like boom, like it hits you with this crazy shit, and like and the movie basically like doesn't let up from that point on. And because it's in a live action format that does feel fairly realistic, it just hits that much harder, right? It's like, why is this happening? What is happening? So yes, the animated series is appropriate for the material, I think. Um, but the movie, like, I think part of the charm of it is that it goes off the deep end with all these like realistic elements to it. Yeah. So with that in mind, here's a question I wanted to pose to everyone with going back to the movie specifically. Like, what is the movie exactly, right? Because, you can't justify people turning into coins in real life. There's all this stuff that you cannot explain. Like in that scene, I'm telling you, like to that point, it was fairly realistic. And then all of a sudden, like Scott does a 64 hit combo on Matthew Patel, and like there's a great reaction from Anna Kendrick, right? Stacy Pilgrim. And she's like, what? Like, what is happening? And she is like, she's the audience at that point. Like, what the fuck is happening? Right. So that's my question. Like, what is this movie? Like, how can you explain what happens in this movie? Like, what does it really mean? Do we have any like theories, any takes on that?
Like what genre would we describe it as, or
Well, I would
like
maybe on even a deeper level, like it clearly this is not like, I don't know, the real world, or are the surreal moments in the movie like not really happening? Are they happening in Scott's head? Is the whole movie a dream? Like, how can you explain like what I just said, like a 64 hit combo? Like that clearly didn't happen in real life, but what is the movie exactly?
yeah, okay. That is a good question. I gotta think about that for a second.
Scott was on some crazy ass drugs. That's the answer.
There's like a fever dream or something. Well, I mean, I kind of had those thoughts today because in the movie there are literal dream sequences, right? Where Scott dreams about Ramona and then she appears, and
Mhm.
then there's that point where he's quote unquote dead, and then he uses his like extra player, his one up to come back. So there it kind of alludes to the fact that maybe he's dreaming and everything that's happening kind of happened to him in real life. Like, yes, he's in a band and he has all these girl problems, and um it's all just kind of blending together in his dreams, and it's just making for this wild ride. So that was kind of my cop out take, that it was like Scott's dream, but I don't know. What do we think?
Like I guess part of me does think this is like, this is just the world and this is the rules of the world.
Mm, the universe of Scott Pilgrim.
Yeah, that this is just
Yeah.
like a super stylized world rather than say
Us.
um just like one dream that Scott Pilgrim will wake up after the movie and be like, "Oh, that was a weird dream."
So
Like
somewhere in the multiverse, you can punch someone so hard they turn into coins, basically, is what you're saying.
yeah. It's almost like this weird amalgamation of just a lot of things growing up that you kind of think and you kind of imagine
Yeah.
of like high school, like you kind of say your fantasy movies and like say your high school rom-coms that were I think really, they were kind of big in the early 2000s, the 90s, like you, it's almost like this like kind of meshing of the two that you kind of just imagine to yourself growing up and like kind of experiencing similar things to Scott. The girl problems hanging out with your friends, or so on and so forth. Like the people you see kind of being like bits and players, but it's almost like this version that you would think up of like a story involving all of them while you yourself are in high school.
Mm.
Like that's why it's so stylized. That's why it's so high, like turned up to 11. Is that it's almost like I guess that would kind of make it a bit of a fever dream.
Yeah.
It might be what I'm coming back to, but
Right.
in a way, it's like it makes you kind of feel like you're that age, and kind of going back to the people you knew around the time. I
Mm.
guess is what I keep getting back at.
Okay.
In a way, maybe the
Yeah.
style kind of reflects that. Um, reflects that, yeah.
Yeah. That's a good take. I like that. Yeah, it's sort of like, when you tell a story of what happened to you previously, you're always going to add, some exaggerations. You can spice up the story a little bit. So this is just like an extreme version of that, right? It's maybe Scott's extremely stylized uh recounting of his life as a young man in Toronto, right? So I guess we could go with that. And yeah, the whole video game influence keeps coming up. I think this is part of that too, right? Like, when we're playing video games, we don't really question that, we're a mustached plumber jumping around, stomping on mushrooms. And like when we played Super Mario Brothers when we were younger, like we didn't really question that. Like I didn't ask the question like, "Oh, what is this? What is really happening here?" Because that would never happen in real life. Like I never asked that question. I just you just go with it, right? So along those lines, maybe that's how we should approach this movie too. We should don't ask, just go with it. That's just this is the world of Scott Pilgrim. Take it as it is. And like so many aspects of the movie, there are video game influences, right? Like the whole premise of the movie is basically a video game story. There are explicit like video game call outs. Young Neil lists Zelda and Tetris as his favorite games, and it's just the whole thing is chock full of video game references. All the battles have like little verses from fighting games and all that. So yeah. Yeah, that's a kind of cool call out too. Like um we've been talking a lot lately about how video game adaptations are like looking to be the next big thing now. Now isn't like 2024, but like 14 years ago, um there really wasn't any of that kind of talk. And the video game stuff in this movie was very refreshing and groundbreaking at the time. There was really nothing like it. And I thought it was really cool how they tapped into that. And yeah, there really wasn't like a movie for gamers then. So I think this movie kind of became that for a lot of people.
Back then was the Yui Ball era video game movie. That's when they were all the worst movie you've ever seen.
Yeah.
Hmm.
All right. Any final thoughts? We can start getting towards wrap up time. We can talk about the comics a little bit later too. I know we
Yeah.
talked about the series. We can get in the comics. Um, let's
Okay, I have a
see.
question
Oh,
for
oh yeah.
Henry.
Oh, question time. Yeah, yeah. I know you had questions. Go
Mhm.
ahead.
I have a question for, I mean, either one of you guys can answer, but I guess for Henry, since I know how much you love this movie, if they were to remake it, who would you want, like Sarah or Scott and Ramona to be played by?
Well, first off, I would not want to see a remake of the movie. Like to me, the movie is like so perfect that I wouldn't want them to remake it. Like what they did with the series was like really good because
Uh-huh.
um it's a cool continuation of the story, but it's so different. It's an anime, it's a series, not a movie, and
It's its own
it's
thing.
it's its own thing. It's totally different. So
Uh-huh.
yeah, to me the movie's kind of sacred, so I wouldn't want it to see I wouldn't want to see a remake. Like even the series I was worried about because I was like, oh man, don't fuck it up. You're gonna taint the movie. But as it turned out, it was really great. And like I've been saying, very different. Um, but I don't know, gun to my head. I mean, like an obvious kind of answer would be like Timothy Chalamet or Tom Holland, right? As a Scott. Um, but I don't know. Like the with those actors, there's like obviously a lot of baggage that comes along with it. And, if you're thinking in those terms, you're thinking like, okay, you're making maybe like a shot for shot remake, which like I'm saying is exactly what you don't want to do with with this franchise, right? Um, but yeah, I mean, I guess my short answer would be like, okay, like gun to my head. Okay, they are for sure making a Scott Pilgrim versus the World remake. What's your casting? You know it's going to be made. Gun to my head. Who would you do? I mean, I guess I would say Tom Holland. That might be kind of an interesting movie to see. But yeah, I guess that's my answer. Oh, and then you asked Ramona. I don't know how to think about that one. Give me some time.
What about you, Christian?
I don't know. Yeah, I do see like when I think they first announced Scott Pilgrim Takes Off, um, they really didn't make any mention, maybe little bits here and there, that it was going to be a completely different story
Hmm.
that would focus like on Ramona, not Scott. Um, and at the time, I was like pretty psyched for it. I was like, oh wow, we get to see this like as a show. We kind of get to get all the kind of the bits and pieces that the movie kind of, didn't fill out. Like that's how I thought it was going to be. And I remember it was like, whoa, this isn't what I was expecting at all. Once I kind of got into it, episode 2 and 3 happened, and I'm like, what? And I didn't know how to feel initially about it. But I think as I like kind of finished it up, uh, I was like, wow, that was really great. That was not what I was expecting, and I really liked it. That was like very refreshing, and I think I liked
Hmm.
that much more than if I would have got a just shot for shot remake, but as an animated series. Um, and now I'm like, okay, I think I'm ready to kind of close the book on Scott Pilgrim. Continue to revisit it, but I don't know if I'd want any new Scott Pilgrim content. The movie's kind of this cult classic lightning in a bottle movie
Yeah.
that they
Hmm.
somehow managed to kind of recapture for the show. Um, all these years later, and it's like, be like, can they really do that again? I do think, if I had to, if I had to, I would say let's just make it a full animated show, make it a lot longer, of course. I do think Scott Pilgrim Takes Off was a little short. So imagine like, like a 12 to 20 episode show, fully animated, say by the same studio, of course, because they did a really good job. Um, I don't know who, of course, with the voice actor, there's a lot you could do, you don't need to get a big actor for Scott. So I think it'd be cool to have someone kind of younger, maybe a little bit more unknown, you know,
Hmm.
hopefully maybe capture that young up and comer vibe where everyone kind of just branches out and somehow does like big great things shortly after shortly after,
Hmm.
and somehow capture it, which is I guess my cop out for saying I don't know. I don't have an actor in mind to play Scott off the top of my head.
Hmm.
Well, the cool thing about animation is that, you can have the same actors do the voice work. We saw that with the series, right? So if Scott Pilgrim lives on in animated form, potentially you could still have all these same actors. And we keep talking about how awesome the cast is. They all came back for the series, so they could all potentially come back for future work as well. That said, just real quick, just because she was really good in another Edgar Wright movie, Thomasin Mackenzie, she was a star of Last Night in Soho. She might be a kind of a cool Ramona Flowers if they did do a remake, which again, I must adamantly say I'm opposed to. But
That's actually
that's my pick.
yeah, that could be a good pick actually.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, she's good. She's really good.
Mhm.
Any other questions, Porfirio?
I feel like I had so many, but I can't think of them at the moment. I'll have to ask you like after we finish recording the podcast or something.
Okay. Well, if they pop in your head, feel free to shoot them out. But for now, how about we give ratings for the movie Scott Pilgrim versus the World on a scale of 1 to 5? What would you rate it? And here's where I will reveal my answer. I know everyone's eagerly anticipating. Is Scott Pilgrim versus the World, uh, does it remain my #1 movie of all time? So I did thoroughly enjoy watching it again today. It does hold up. It is still a 5 out of 5 for me. A near perfect movie. Yeah, there were things I noticed today that I didn't notice before. So yeah, there's a lot of rewatchability here. The movie is so chock full of stuff that there's always stuff that I pick up on subsequent viewings, and it is interesting to revisit this movie over time because yeah, things in the culture change, and you pick up on stuff that's a little different. So there's kind of an evolution thing going on too. Um, so still very watchable. Um, that said, I don't know if I will say definitively this is my favorite movie of all time anymore. I did say that before. But yeah, I don't think I'll say that at this point. It's kind of a cop out, but I will say that it is at least tied for #1 greatest of all time. How about we say that? And then of course that begs the question, like, what other movies
Tied
would
with
I
what?
like tie it with, right? So
Winter Soldier. It's Winter Soldier, right?
that is correct, Porfirio, Captain
Yeah.
America, the Winter Soldier, and Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. So I think these three movies I would currently rank as a tie for my favorite of all times. Yeah. So we'll leave it at that. Okay, how about you, Porfirio? What would you rate Scott Pilgrim versus the World? This might start a whole
Uh,
nother conversation, but no, but go ahead, go ahead.
um. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I would probably just say like I'm sorry, Henry. Like it's straight up like 2. I think it was a fun movie. Like I definitely think Scott Pilgrim was ahead of its time. Um, the effects are cool, but you know, I just like I said, I just thought that a lot was going on, and um, I just don't think that it was just. It may have been maybe a little too weird out there for my taste,
Mhm.
for this storyline, which is why I think it works better in animation. But yes, yeah, that it's for me it was kind of like a 2.
Fair enough. Yeah, you made a comment earlier that resonated with me a bit, and that's when you said you just didn't really like Michael Cera in the movie, and like in my mind, like if if that's a thing for you, then yeah, like I get it because especially with the movie, like with the series shifts away from the Scott Pilgrim character a bit, and it becomes more of a true like ensemble kind of story. The movie really is like centrally Scott Pilgrim. And if you like aren't a fan of Michael Cera, or if he just bothers you, or you're annoyed by him, like I get it. Like it doesn't matter how great everything else is, like you're not really gonna enjoy the movie so much, yeah. I get that. Like, yeah, you think about it, like the movie, it really does revolve around Scott Pilgrim and Michael Cera's performance. So, as much
I
as like I'm annoyed by like a 2 rating, like I kind of get that take from that
I,
perspective.
I just think also like it's not also again like Michael Cera, but I just think like Scott's like character, like and like how we were talking about earlier about like how he was just like he's just like a douche, you know? Because like the animated one, you know, it's voiced by Michael Cera, but I just feel like it was more written better, you know? Like
Hmm.
I don't know, like the humor was a little bit better. He didn't seem so much like a dick. Like he was just kind of like okay, like I'm here and I want to win the heart of Ramona and everything. Um I just think like he was somehow written better in the animated than the live action. And I think because the live action like centered so much around like Scott Pilgrim and how much of a dick he is. I think that's why I was just kind of like turned off by it, you know?
Got it. Got it.
Yep.
All
Yeah,
right. What
very
about you,
valid.
Christian?
Um, yeah. Let's see. So I do really, really like this movie. I wouldn't say it's a personal favorite movie of mine, but I think in terms of my like comic book movie favorites, you know, actually, I probably would say it's overall, I think a personal favorite. I've seen it many times. Like I said, it does watching it does conjure up a lot of feelings of nostalgia being that age and that period of time. Uh, uh, um, and so I think I do like, especially right now, just I do have a lot of feelings kind of wrapped up in the movie. Um, of course, as we did mention, it is dated. I do think Ramona is a bit underdeveloped in this movie. But I also think now with Scott Pilgrim Takes Off in a way works as like a companion piece, like a sequel to this one that kind of fills in a lot of the gaps of the first movie while expanding on it, expanding on it and kind
Mm,
of taking the narrative in new places. Um, so like I do think there are a lot of problems, but I do, and I do agree with Porfirio. I could see 100% where you're coming from. Or if you don't care for Michael Cera and you don't care for Scott, the character, then I could see how this movie can, just probably doesn't work. Um, but I think I do really, really like this movie. I'll probably go with a 5 as well. I'll be with you, Henry, on that one. Um, one of the, like I said, one of the great cult classics.
Indeed. Good call. Um, yeah, I think we touched upon it earlier, but um, yeah, one kind of final thing I want to say about the movie is that it really is the ultimate fandom movie. Yeah, like we're so wrapped up into fandom these days, and like this movie just touches upon so many different fandoms, right? And it really is kind of a blueprint for a lot of future stuff, and like how a lot of movies and shows these days are like a love letter to this, a love letter to that, right? And this movie, in a way, really kind of kicked off a lot of that stuff, right? This movie is a love letter to video games and so many other things, right? So in our fandom world, I think this movie, among a lot of other things, should be recognized as like a big fandom moment. Yeah, I guess we could say that. Okay, so like we often do, let's give a comics recommendation. This is going to be easy because Scott Pilgrim versus the World, the movie, was indeed based on a comic book series named Scott Pilgrim, a 6-volume series. I've read it. I know Porfirio, you haven't read it yet. Highly recommend it to you. Christian, have you read the Scott Pilgrim series?
I've read some of it.
Okay,
But not all. I haven't finished it. I started, but yeah. I have really liked what I've read so far of Scott Pilgrim.
excellent. Yeah, I can give kind of a brief little rundown, but yeah, just kind of your initial take from what you've read so far. What are your thoughts?
Um, I like that it does move a bit slower than the movie. Of course, because the movie condenses all 6 volumes down. Um, and it kind of, you get a little bit more the interpersonal relationships. You kind of get more of that rather than just, I guess, focusing on the evil exes a bit. Like as far as I've gotten, they haven't gotten too far into it just yet. But I like it, and of course, the style does feel. I think I forget if Brian Lee O'Malley also drew it.
You did,
He
yeah,
did,
you
yeah.
did,
So that
yeah,
is cool to see when you have an artist and a writer, essentially being the same person.
yeah.
And so it is cool to see his full vision. Like, as we were talking about, it's very influenced by manga. That's how manga's written. So it's cool to see that here.
Yeah, right on. That's a good call out that Brian Lee O'Malley not only wrote, but he illustrated the Scott Pilgrim comics. And that's always cool, and that happens kind of less often than you'd think, right? It's sort of like a writer director, right? They're doing it all in a way. But with comics, like it's just so time consuming to do both. It becomes like less common, right? So when it does happen and it really works, it's that much more special. So yeah, this really is O'Malley's vision. And yeah, he was really involved in the movie. He was really involved in the series. So his DNA is in all of this, and I think that really helps in making all of this so great. I do think the comics are great. I do think the movie's great. I do think the series is great. And it is cool that Brian Lee O'Malley is really involved in all of it. Yeah. Let's see what else to say about the comics. I haven't read a ton of indie comics. Like my comics reading is like almost entirely Marvel. Um, but I've dabbled in some indies, and I will say that the Scott Pilgrim comics are among my favorite indie comics of all time. I really like them. I really like the original black and white versions. I really like the more recent colorized versions. Really great. The movie is very faithful to the comics, which is always cool to see. Really, there are just some fairly minor changes between the two. Um, I guess the most notable one is the Katayanagi twins. In the movie, the twins are musicians, right? There's literally a battle of the bands between them and Sex Babam. But in the comics, they're not musicians at all. They're like robotics experts. So when Scott battles them, it's like Scott versus their robot creations. It's not like a battle of the bands. So that part is actually very different. Beyond that, there's not a whole lot of difference. Like you were saying, Christian, the comics, it's longer form storytelling. So that is like a big difference too, obviously. And yeah, you kind of get to see more of these characters. Yeah, if a complaint about the movie is, oh, I didn't really get to know the characters, I didn't really care about them that much. Well, check out the comics. That's a good way to sort of get more well acquainted with them. Um, I think notably, there's some backstory in the comics too. There's a character called Lisa Miller, who's pretty significant in the comics, and she's all but erased from the movie. There's actually like an Easter egg where they mention her. It's like a blink and you miss it sort of thing, but she is name dropped in the movie, doesn't appear in the movie. But she's kind of a key character in the comics. So I was sort of looking forward to maybe her becoming like a key character in the series, but that didn't really happen either. So I kind of wonder if Brian Lee O'Malley was like, oh, let's just get rid of this character. I don't know. I don't know. But that's notable. And like I said, the movie's so faithful that there aren't a lot of differences. Like those are the two main things I would mention. I know there are like um internet write-ups about every little tiny difference. You can look those up. But yeah, I think they're primarily fairly minor. Yeah, highly recommend. Um cool little Easter egg I wanted to call out. So I mentioned the comics are like heavily manga inspired. So apparently Brian Lee O'Malley was heavily influenced by the great manga creator Osamu Tezuka, who's he's a legend. He created Astro Boy and tons of other awesome shit. In the Scott Pilgrim versus the World movie, Scott Pilgrim at one point is wearing an Astro Boy t-shirt. So kind of a cool little Easter egg there. But yeah, the whole manga influence is very, very apparent. The the comic series is technically a North American English language indie comic, not a manga, but it does feel like a manga. You're reading it, it does have manga vibes for sure. And yeah, obviously it was influenced by manga, and it's cool to see like that DNA all throughout all this stuff, right? The comics, the movie, certainly the series, right, which is literally an anime. So high recommendation for the Scott Pilgrim comics. And with that, we can wrap up the episode. This is farewell from Henry, Christian, and Porfirio.